Best Picture's YouTube channel. I am the editor, owner, chief, head honcho, whatever you want to call it, of Next Best Picture, Matt Neglia. And here joining me is the returning Daniel Howat.
Hello, hello. Great to be here.
And joining us for this week's conversation, we have Tom O'Brien.
My YouTube debut.
Wow. Incredible.
Well, this week we are talking about some Academy news. We got two pieces of news today from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. One that is definitive, one that is speculative. So why don't we start off first and foremost with the definitive news. The Academy has established a new production and technology branch, which is going to consist of over 400 individuals that were previously classified as members at large. So this is ranging from a lot of different avenues here, from chief technology officers to stunt men and women, script supervisors, choreographers, music supervisors. There's a lot of different roles encompassed in this. And every year we're always wondering what changes the Academy is ultimately going to bring about. And sometimes they bring about these small changes that make us go, oh, really? Like this was on the docket. This is what you all debated over and came up with, because we're always constantly asking for changes left and right. And some of them are big, some of them are small, of course. But one thing that I think is most interesting about this development is how Howat and Tom, you guys weren't a part of this conversation, but myself and Isaiah recently talked about there being a creation for a Best Stunts Oscar, which would go to not like a stunt ensemble like SAG, but a stunt coordinator, the same way how supervisors within sound get the award, as opposed to all the other people that work beneath them in their respective department. So now that we're seeing a branch being carved out here, and I understand there are all these other different types that are lumped in, do we think we're getting closer possibly to the creation of a Best Stunt Oscar or another Oscar in general?
I think it's that's not why this branch was created. So
No.
I don't want to get ahead of ourselves and say, oh, next stop is Oscar for Best Stunt Coordination.
But you can't deny that there's been a lot of talk about this as of
exactly.
late.
That's what I was going to say. Is like, though that's not why this was created. The now stunt coordinators, in addition to all of those other technicians and craftspeople that you mentioned, now have representation through a governor for their branch. And so I have to assume that the stunt coordinators that are now a part of this represented branch will campaign, and maybe so will music supervisors or some of these other technicians, so maybe there's another Oscar on the horizon, another category. But yeah, that representation angle does lead me to believe that within the next few years, it'll at least start coming back up again.
What do you think?
There's been a lot of talk about various categories being added. I think stunts and casting were the two areas that probably got the most online push. And if we have recognized anything, I think this particular administration of the Academy has been very responsive to online and viewers and fans' requests.
In good ways and bad.
Yeah, yes, exactly. But I think this is in line with that, particularly in the stunt area. It is curious, it comes the week after John Wick, but I think that's just a coincidence. Nonetheless, since that film got released and received such acclaim, the emphasis on the stunts in that film, I think, is just rekindled the spotlight that the Academy, I think, set up and paid a little more attention to it.
Maybe. But at the same time, like Howat said, this wasn't the reason why this was done. Ultimately, like you said, it's built there for there to be this representative group for all these different technicians and people that work behind the scenes on film. And in doing so, I mean, that's fantastic. But what we ultimately want to see is we want to see some of these new categories get created at some point down the line. And I do have to ask time and time again, when we do talk about Academy reform, why do you think that we fixate so much on new category creation when it seems like all the time the Academy is always looking to take categories away to cut down on showtime. It almost feels like it's wishful thinking. But also
It
too,
is.
it does seem like that we're so held up on wanting to make sure that everyone is properly recognized, almost like this idea of, oh, everybody gets a trophy. We don't want to leave anybody, anybody behind in a way, right?
Yeah, I think a really important thing to note in this whole conversation, we're looking at the creation of a new branch and talking about a new category being announced. But let's not forget, Tom, you mentioned best casting as a potential new category that people have asked for. Well, what was the last new branch created? Casting. That was the
Right.
last branch. So they already did this. What I think off the top of my head, was it 2013 that was added? I believe I might be wrong on the year, but it was in very recent history, within the last decade or so. And we haven't
BAFTA has
seen
an award for casting, and
right.
quite frankly, I think that's been a kind of odd
Well,
list
my
of winners lately. But
totally. Well, my point being though is new branch just did not equal new category, right? And
no,
so with this, we can't expect that it's going to happen. But I do think there is more chatter. For as much as you want to take it, it's very unscientific, but there has been chatter about best stunt Oscar more so than there has been about a best casting one. So,
and that's only
who
going to
knows?
continue into the summer when Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1 comes out. I'm sure we'll maybe even hear Vin Diesel chime in when Fast X gets released in theaters. He'll think it should be up for Best Picture, and they should create a whole new Oscar for the Fast and the Furious franchise.
Yes,
but
can't wait.
No, but the other thing that is very interesting that you bring up here, Howard, that I'm just like kind of rummaging through in my brain as we're thinking about this is, I think that we could see individual Oscars possibly be handed out to these various different departments over time. Think of like the Emmys and how they have an Emmy for everybody, it seems like.
Yeah.
Right? They have the Creative Arts Emmys. It's its own separate show, basically, that represents all these different branches. So I'm wondering, could we see more Oscars get introduced should the show eventually move off of ABC and potentially to streaming only?
It depends, I think, as to whether they want to divide the creative arts with the on-airs.
Yeah.
It may be a hybrid of that. Perhaps a network, some non-streaming network will want to take the big show, and Hulu may take the creative arts. I think once they can get out of this ABC contract, then they have a lot more room to experiment and just try and determine what is in the best interest of the Academy.
That's the thing. I don't know if this is a hot take or not. My thing with Oscars compared to Emmys or Grammys, is that they are more exclusive. So it's maybe the hot take is that I do kind of want to gatekeep winning an Oscar a little bit. I kind of want it to be an exclusive club that's hard to get to. Now, I want a whole other conversation now, more diversity, yes, but in terms of how many people win an Oscar, it's tough to win an Oscar. It's really hard. Winning a Grammy, on the other hand, isn't that difficult relatively to the industries. And so I kind of like how difficult it is, which is why I've pushed back a little bit on an ensemble win, for instance, an Oscar for best ensemble where the whole ensemble wins Oscars. No, I don't like that idea.
Should go to the casting director.
Casting director. That sounds reasonable. So things like that, where I'm like, I do, or like an Oscar for best young performer. I would love more attention on young performers, but I don't want a whole slew of children being Oscar winners.
Now, the only other, if we're going to go off on this really quick before we get to our second point, the only category where I personally would be okay with actors getting recognized in another category would be the creation of a best, I don't know what you would call it, but say like a best voice category. Something that recognizes both talents in animation as well as motion performance capture, whatever they're calling it nowadays, if you ask John Landau. But I feel that we've come so far in terms of there being digital capture performances from actors like Andy Serkis who have not been properly recognized. Now, you might say that maybe the creation of a category is cheating, but let's also think of it from the standpoint of how if we didn't have a best documentary feature category, we would rarely ever see documentaries probably get nominated elsewhere. So
Yeah,
with
totally.
that said, it's one of those things where, yeah, okay, they are eligible to compete and they could get into one of these acting categories with a voice performance, but is it ever going to really happen? Probably not, honestly.
Totally.
So
As long
that's
as a category like that didn't devolve into what the audiobook Grammy has become, right?
Mhm.
Where it's like,
Yes.
man, Glenn Close gets tired of losing and losing and losing, and so she decides, oh well, all right, I'm just gonna go do my voice performance and get my Oscar. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying? So it's, again, I'm gatekeeping, like I'm totally being like more exclusive about it, but I think there's something that I like about Oscars being tough to get. So it's a push and pull, pros and cons.
So creation of a new branch within the Academy. But now there's a piece of speculative news, which I think is very interesting here. The Academy is thinking of adding a new parameter here for theatrical distribution to be a requirement for films to be eligible for Best Picture at the Oscars. Now, there currently already is a bunch of requirements for this, but more specifically, they are saying that films it will have to play in theaters from, I think it's 15 to 20 of the top 50 markets in the United States to be eligible. And right now it's just New York and LA. That's it. So 15 to 20 of the top markets. This is a big deal if this comes to pass, because this disrupts streamers' plans for theatrical release at the moment. Hold on. This also, I think, causes quite a disruption with regards to platform releasing, for especially for movies that are maybe working up until the last minute to get post ready in time for a premiere. I feel like we would actually see a lot more spread out throughout the release calendar. We've been talking about that a lot recently, about how Oscar contenders need to stop backloading from September until December, and they need to utilize the spring and the summer more to build up word of mouth, establish a presence, and be a key figure in the awards race moving forward. Potentially, I'm not saying this is definitely happening, but we might be seeing something like that happening with Ben Affleck's Air, given its reception it might receive from audiences within a couple of days' time. So, with that said, if this did come to pass, what do we think would happen as a result?
Well, I think that it's certainly going to change distribution ideas. I'm afraid it's going to penalize those small films that don't have stars, that until now have depended upon awards recognition to be able to build the audience. You can put Tar in 15 cities, and even though it may be a challenging film, you've got a star there. But Drive My Car, Women Talking, they really needed help, and the awards were what helped to give them that extra oomph.
Okay, but how about this though? How about this? You still can do your Cannes, Venice, TIFF, Telluride, whatever world premiere, but then instead of holding on to the film until December, it releases still in New York and LA, say in late October, early November. And then you can build to that 15, 20 at least before end of year. Do you really need to be releasing over Christmas weekend in just New York and LA, and then be able to qualify thereafter by going wide then in January? I mean, uh,
Yeah.
that's not the qualifications for getting in, but that's what they typically tend to do, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I actually don't think this disrupts very much. That's my perspective. Drive My Car, I've seen other people reference that, but the thing is that already did expand in December. It was in like I forget the number off the top of my head. I apologize. It was in like 50 plus markets in December already. So I was struggling trying to think, what is a film that would not qualify under this market, with the exception of Netflix films. But we know Netflix, it doesn't matter. They've got the money to do it. So Netflix, it doesn't matter.
They're stubborn about not wanting to do it. They could do it,
but they care more. Yeah, they care more about winning Oscars. So it's not going to stop them. It changes their distribution plan.
But this wouldn't stop them from winning Oscars. They can still release a film in more markets. Like look what they did with Knives Out or Glass Onion, rather.
Yeah.
No, I'm agreeing with you. I agree with you. Like it doesn't. That's what I'm saying. This doesn't change much. The other streamers are already moving this way, Amazon and Apple, and so for Netflix, and even Netflix has started changing that way with Glass Onion. So like really, the question for me is: are there any indies that would be really impacted by this? But looking through the list of nominees over the past decade or so, there's really no nominees that this would, like, if this had been in place, would have prevented them. Now, it would have changed release strategies, like Women Talking, for instance. That didn't technically have a release that would qualify here. But we know it could have.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Well, how could you say it wouldn't impact that? Like, that's a film that would have been impacted by this, and that was a Best Picture nominee.
No. What I mean is, who would be unable to adhere to this requirement? Like Women Talking, we know they had the money to adhere to this requirement. It just would have changed their release strategy.
And also, too, the film was finished. It showed in September, obviously.
That's exactly what I'm saying. So that's what I'm saying. I'm like, I don't think this changes anything. It does change some distribution plans from studios, but in terms of like what films would or wouldn't qualify, I don't think it changes the crop of films that qualify.
No, that's a good point, because as I'm thinking about this right now, any film that does release at the later point of the year that is just New York and LA and then does wide in January, traditionally is ready to go at least a month before. Usually, if not, it's got a festival release beforehand, and it's just building up word of mouth. Even something like Babylon. I remember I saw Babylon around Thanksgiving, I remember. And it came out late December. I mean, granted, it was wide release, but I'm just trying to think of that in terms of what was like a late last minute film that was released in just New York and LA and really was not ready until the last possible minute. That it couldn't be shown earlier and then build up to that 15-20. Because you could still, this is not to say that you have to open in 15-20 at once. You could still build up to it.
Yes, you can.
But you would have to release earlier.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. That's why it doesn't feel that groundbreaking to me. Like I see people like thinking this changes the whole race, and I'm like, it changes timeline a little bit, I suppose, but like it doesn't change who the contenders are. It doesn't change who would be able to, like, people are really concerned for independents who, maybe not be able to afford the release in 15 to 20 markets. That's a totally valid concern, but the reality is the Academy's not nominating those films anyway. Like I can't think of a nomination of a film that was nominated.
Well, how wide did To Leslie go?
That's one of the only ones. Yeah, it didn't go super wide. But also, as of right now, again, this is all speculative, so details may change. As of right now, it appears, as what's being reported, it's just Best Picture eligibility, not in other categories. That's what's being reported. So,
well, if that's the case, then to me, it's a moot point at that. Because
I agree.
Yeah. I mean, if it was all the other categories, then I would say
it might be.
Hold up
it might be. We don't know, but what's being reported just says Best Picture.
Yeah. If it's just Best Picture, then I can sort of get down with it, because how often do we see a little tiny film like that in this given circumstance? Make it into Best Picture anyway? You don't.
Exactly.
You need a long campaign. You need to be in the can usually at least a month before release. And by a month before release, I mean even something like Avatar: The Way of Water, right? Okay, fine. That was a big film that needed to be worked on until the last minute. Same thing with something like Nightmare Alley, worked on until the last minute by Guillermo before its release. There were so many others I could think of where they were working on it all the way up until it was ready, and it was a late December release. But guess what? They all opened wide.
Exactly.
So they wouldn't fall into this anyway.
I think that this is a great plan, because it's kind of having their cake and eating it too, where they can support theatrical and support, like kind of make a symbolic stand to say theatrical is important. The Academy stands with theatrical, while also not really impacting the nominees. It doesn't change a lot. It changes tiny little bits, and it kind of puts Netflix it forces Netflix to release a little bit wider. But that's it. So it's kind of like a good symbolic gesture, and not much more than that. So I support it. I also just don't think it changes much.
It would be really interesting to see if Netflix would decide to just toss the money and go, hey, you know what, we're going to just do wider releases for all of our movies and see which ones stick, or if they would be strategic and pick certain ones.
Yeah,
I imagine they would have to do the latter, because you can't just piss away money like that.
exactly.
No, but it's true. I live in a 45,000 population town, and we get Netflix films in theaters a week before they premiere on the streaming service. They're doing it anyway, and if
Exactly.
they're gonna play it in my town, they'll play it in big cities.
I do think though, Matt, actually, I think that's a really interesting question that I hadn't thought of, because like, it's curious when Netflix maybe backs the wrong horse, like they did for this year with All Quiet. All Quiet was not their big contender. Far from
No.
it. It was like it was maybe 4 or 5 films down. And so now we did know by December that it was becoming their contender.
But the question is, would they have known earlier
Exactly. That's
and
what I'm
had the
getting at.
foresight to release it in time in enough markets?
Yeah, so that's the interesting question to me, is because Netflix doesn't just automatically release all their movies. If they pick the wrong contender, then oops, too late. This film that would have been eligible for best, or should have been eligible for best picture, now they missed their opportunity. I do think that's a rare thing. Like, I don't anticipate that would happen very often, but it's an interesting idea. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we know that Killers of the Flower Moon from Martin Scorsese is going to get a wide theatrical release from Apple before it goes on to the streaming service. Hell, we don't even know what the date is for it to go on to Apple TV at this time. We only know October 6th is the theatrical release date. We're having its world premiere at Cannes, and then it will probably open up New York Film Festival, is my guess, before it opens up in theaters in October, and then probably Apple TV Plus. I mean, I don't know. So it's interesting because normally the theatrical model at the moment is releases in theaters, then it's usually on the streaming platform with something like Netflix. What, a week, 2 weeks later, 2 weeks
Yeah.
tops. Though, I feel like with Killers, they might do Apple TV maybe a month later. Is my guess.
I think a Thanksgiving release for Killers of the Flower Moon on Apple makes a lot of sense. I mean, maybe they'll go earlier, I don't know, but that, like, timing wise, that makes a lot of sense. That's like 6 weeks later.
But how wide do you think they're going to go with something like that?
With
Because
theaters, you mean? Like, what number of theaters?
yes, that's October release. And I say this because I am also thinking of it from the perspective of these streaming companies who are being forced now to show that they're making profits, and Theatrical is going to cut into their subscription model, for not tremendously so, but it does eat away. If I can go to a theater and see it, there are some people who will choose that route. And then if they know that those films that they want to see are going to be there, why then do I need to pay for the subscription to see it later?
I don't pretend to be a business guy, so forgive me if I say something that's foolish here, but
We're just talking here. We're just asking questions.
Right. To me, the thing that I actually disagree with your assessment, because I think, depending on the film, depending on the release strategy, all of those things, you're earning money from theatrical as well. So, like, I think it would balance out. In fact, I don't think most people, like, I'm going to still pay for Apple TV, and I'm going to go see Killers of the Flower Moon in theaters. And so I think that's where most people land, especially for Netflix. Most people just still have Netflix. But if you are a cinephile or whatever, you're going to go see a movie in theaters. So it's going to earn a few million in theaters. So depending on how much marketing they put behind it, I think you're earning the millions and you're not really losing many subscribers. So to me, it seems like a net plus. But again, that's why I don't make those decisions, because I don't know what I'm talking about.
But also, too, like, final point I'll make here is even take the film part of it out for a minute. Let's just say Killers of the Flower Moon, I will use this as an example, gets the theatrical release in October. Nobody necessarily cares to keep their Apple TV Plus subscription to watch it later. They already saw it. What's, I think, going to keep the streamers in play with keeping their subscribers on board aren't then going to be these movies that, yeah, it's a plus that you can go and rewatch it later, but it's going to be TV shows which are not being released theatrically and are going to want to keep people coming back. So you need to make sure your TV show brand, I think, is rock solid, that you have a constant stream of shows that are going to keep people constantly engaged. Like HBO is a great example where as soon as one show ends, I'm usually like, okay, I'm done with HBO programming. But then the next show they have programmed after, I'm like, oh crap, they've got me going from The Last of Us now over to, you know, and it's like, it's just one thing after another and it never ends. I think the streamers need to figure out, once Ted Lasso ends at Apple, what is the next show that someone who watches Ted Lasso is going to want to watch after? The problem is that they've all got too much content. And so people go long stretches without using their Netflix subscription, using their Apple TV subscription. And so I think if they want to be profitable, and if this does come to pass and they got to get down with giving their films a wider theatrical release and they're worried about it eating into their profits, they got to make sure their TV game is rock solid, you know, because that's going to produce multiple seasons, multiple years, and just keep people coming back, hopefully.
Totally agree.
If I can only go by Netflix, very often their awards entries premiere on the streaming service for 1 week. The next week, it's gone from the top 10.
Yep.
Wow.
And it's all the TV stuff has risen back up. So that's, you're absolutely right. I think that's the base of the operation.
Yeah, exactly. Any other final thoughts on this potential new ruling that might get passed?
No, I support it. I think it's an interesting idea. Again, I want to see the specifics. I want to see like what do the rules state. But the idea of it, I support, because I think it's a win-win. It's a win for everybody.
And I think that the studios now have enough time to think about and rejigger any kind of release patterns to be able to accommodate it.
And I think
it's going to be. I don't think it's going to be implemented. If it is implemented this year, it ain't going to take effect this year. It would have to take effect for next year. Release plans are already set this year, so you can't do that.
I do think it'll happen though. I actually think that they're going to vote for this. I agree. It'll take effect next year, but yeah, I do think it's going to pass. If this is a real report, if the details of the report are correct, I think it sounds reasonable enough that they would go for it.
I mean, as somebody who loves the theatrical experience, I'm all for it. I welcome it personally. But we'll see. We'll bring about some very interesting changes, that's for sure. All right, Tom, thank you so much for joining me and Daniel for this conversation. Tell everyone that's listening right now where they can find you on the internet. You're muted, Tom.
You can find me on Twitter at Thomas E. O'Brien, and you can check out my movie reviews on Instagram at Tom O'Brien on Movies.
Daniel Howat, same question.
You can find me on Twitter at HowatDK.
And asking the question of myself, you can find me at Next Best Picture. Thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in for this latest video. Drop us a comment, leave us a subscription. Let us know what you all think about these latest developments from the Academy of Motion Pictures Arts and Sciences, and we will see you all next time.